We now have a project file created, and in that project file we have a model called tower. And within that model we have imported a surface as a ground object. And so we have one object called ground 1. At this point we're going to start the design process. We're going to create a building pad at a certain elevation, and then off of that building pad we're going to slope and create a kind of a gentle grass area around the building. So beginning on page 1-8 in our training guide, we're going to step through that process. So I'm going to go ahead and get back into my Power Civil design file called siteplan2d.dgn. And I'm going to open up my project. So I can access that from Civil, Modeler, and this time I'll open an existing project. So I'll click Browse, select my file, GSF extension, and open up my project. So again, we're going to focus our attention on where our building is. The building pad, we're going to set that 2 feet above the ground at a flat elevation. So the first thing I want to do is create a new object inside Modeler. Remember our 3 components. We have models, objects, and elements. So I'm going to create a new object. Modeler, object, new. I'm going to select the building type and the object name building 1. And I'm going to toggle on the add to active model. So this object will immediately become part of the model, and once elements are in it, it will merge and become part of the model. So I'll click OK, and I can see in Modeler I have a toolbar called Active Site Object Control, and I can see the display is turned on. That's the display of my contours. I'm working on the active model called tower, and since I've just created it, I'm working on the active object building 1. I can dock that, as I had previously, to the top. Now that I have an object, it's time to create our first element. That's going to be this red shape. So again, an element is a 2D or 3D or Power Civil graphic. In this case, the red shape. I'm going to assign elevation to it through the Modeler Elements tool, and specifically the New Edit tool. So I'm going to create a new element. We provide several ways to create elements. Before I move any farther, I'm going to go ahead and have this element that I create added to the object building 1. On the New Edit dialog, I can create elements, and I can create points. I can create something called a section, and of course we have some display options for displaying the elements. So on the Element tab, that's where I'm going to focus most of the work on. That's assigning elevation to elements. We have 6 different ways here. We can slope from one element to another. We can slope radially from a point to an element. We can start at a point on an element and slope along it to define its elevation. We can drape or calculate the elevation based on a surface by draping that element on a surface, that being a model or object surface. We can simply key in an elevation for the element, constant elevation, or we can access our alignments and profiles from coordinate geometry and assign an element elevation based on that. Let's take a look at the drape on model / object. This tool allows me again to calculate the elevation of an element based on a surface of a model or surface of an object. So I'm going to assign the elevation based on an object surface in my case, and the object surface being ground 1. The feature that I'm going to assign it is going to be a break line. Here are the other feature types that I could assign: boundary, contour, void, hole. Again, an element being something that we assign elevation to, but we also assign a feature to. And then finally, my quick definition earlier was that we assign association to it. So we can remember how elevation gets computed, and therefore we can update it if need be. So in this case, I'm going to establish the elevation based on the ground surface, and I want it to remember that, and so I toggle that on. Furthermore, I want to base it on the ground surface, but I want to base it on the ground surface plus 2 feet. So I'm going to put in 2 of it as an offset height. And then I want to use, in this particular case, as you can see the contours in the view, they're sloping down or up, really. We're going down grade as we go up the screen. So in this area the elevation varies all throughout the shape, and I want the shape to be a flat surface. So I want it to calculate elevation at the highest elevation that it finds in that red shaped area. So I'm going to set it to maximum. We have other options here. You can have it calculate elevation at every vertice of the graphic. So if I were to select the graphic, everywhere you see a little blue handle, that would be a vertice, and it would calculate an elevation for each one of those. And you can imagine that would create something with multiple elevations on it. Entire element would be like taking that shape and laying it down on the ground like a blanket. It would follow the surface. Centroid would create a flat elevation for the shape. The only difference between that and the other options below here is the centroid would calculate where the center is and use that point to find the elevation. So in my case, it would figure out what is the elevation at the center and use that for the entire surface. Minimum would find the lowest elevation in that area and use that. Maximum, which is what I want to do, would find the highest. So now I just need to select the element that I want to assign elevation to. So I'm going to select the highlight color here in the dialog, and then I'm going to use the select elements icon on my dialog, and then I'm going to click on the element that I want to assign elevation to, and I can see that it highlights in the appropriate color from my dialog. At this point I've satisfied everything that the dialog needs, so I click apply, and my building is added, or my element is added as a break line to my object called building. Once it's added to the object called building, since the building was placed in the model, slopes come off of the building at its predetermined side slopes of 3 to 1, and it merges down to the ground surface below it. And that's creating an object by draping the element on the surface and adding that element to the object. The next step is to take a look at adding the grass area around the building.